Hello, my name is Rashidah Ismaili Abu Bakr, and I have something to say. My experience on the Lower East Side was foundational and in so many ways. I'd never lived in a very cultural and multicultural, really, community before. There were all these other people, and they were artists who would maybe sometimes rent two apartments so that they could have a studio in one, and then they lived in the other because the rents were cheap, because these were tenement houses that had been put up about a century earlier to accommodate the influx of European immigrants, mostly from war-torn areas, and especially Jews and Italians. And they really were also seeking economic and personal freedom. And the children, I think, of that era were all the better because they grew up in the kind of a free it was kind of tribal in a way. But it really, I think, reflected the promise of America in that I'm not saying it was a Shangri-La, it was Eden or anything. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that the possibilities of walking down the street and seeing a Black woman with an obviously mixed race child, or a Black man walking down the street with a white woman or a Chinese woman, or a white man walking down the street with a Chinese or a Black woman. That was just normal. And so nobody really, quote, stared or, quote, looked at them. And we lived side by side with the older East Siders, many of whom were political. Other people came because there was just such destitution. So you had all these people coming together and trying to find a place, people of their own. And so the Lower East Side kind of became a kind of a tribal. You knew your tribe. You knew when you met somebody that they were this. And people created little reading sessions and journals and underground, what we would later call underground publications. And so people were publishing each other's work and critiquing each other's work. And we always had bookstores. And that was what we thought. A big night on the town for me and Dawood was going to the bookstore and hanging out in the bookstore. That sounds silly today, but not now. Umbra was a very short-lived but very important group of artists, primarily writers. And they espoused a kind of freedom to write milieu, that you had to have some type of commitment to social justice. You had to have some commitment to integrity and artistic integrity and honesty, and some capacity for intellectual capabilities and sharing. And the recognition that there was something called a Black writer, a Black painter, a Black dancer, a Black artist in general, or a Black intellectual. It didn't necessarily mean that you had to be a college graduate necessarily, but it did imply that you were aware of things. And you could consider that political. So the political and the artistic were blended together. I was brought into Umbra by a man named Tom Feelings, who's a visual artist. That's one of his sketches up there, one of his drawings up there. And Tom and I remained brother, sister, friends until his death. And he was one of the artists that did artwork for some of the writers and publications. Some of that were going on downtown. One was called The Liberator. And so he introduced me to, he said, there's a group of writers, a group of artists that we meet and we critique each other's work and we talk about art and we help each other learn about different things. So he brought me to one of the meetings and it was transformational. And I will say that all of those people that I met remained in my life until they died. My first poem was published in The Liberator, and that was due to Tom Feelings. And I was not showing my work to a lot of people, didn't even realize that I wrote poetry. I was a student, mother, worker, trying to survive on my own. I thought it was much more communication between the artist giving and people receiving. And so it was a reciprocity that I felt was going on, a reciprocal relationship. And in that, I met a lot of musicians. I just wanted to hear them play because jazz was so central in my life. My uncle, my mother's brother, who'd been in the Second World War, introduced me to jazz when I was 4 years old. He brought this turntable back from France and had a wooden case made for it. And we used to listen to jazz in Africa, right? When I was 4 and 5, because at that time he had been traumatized, so he didn't talk. And the only communications that he really had was me and him and the music. I was the only person who could touch the records. He showed me how to touch them. The big 78s or something like that. Big records. And every fortnight we would go to town and buy little boxes of needles because you had to change them, right? It was kind of like that in the village. And there was Sweet Basil, and then there was a club called Juniors, not too far from where I lived. They were all like 2-3 blocks from where I lived. So I became good friends to Cedar Walton. And he had a bass player named Sam Jones. And Sam was this tall guy, and he called me his African baby. And he would say, "That's my baby. If you F with her, F with me." So everybody kind of took me under their wing. And if somebody was playing and I would walk by and I say, "Hey, baby, hey, Sam's baby, you coming to here?" I said, no, I don't think so. I don't. Put me on the guest list. So I got to hear all this music firsthand while I was working and struggling. Somewhere in that course, I think it was in Fred's sketch class, there was a woman, and we became friends. And she was teaching. She was teaching at a place called Job Corps. And she said, "We need someone, you have a really interesting background because you can do literature, you can whatever." So I got this job. And I worked for about 2-3 years there. I really felt that I was doing important work. But because we were doing radical things, I was teaching reading and literature to chronic truants, teaching them to read and write by reading and acting plays. So we would instead of just like reading a history book, We would read it in the classroom, assign roles, and these kids were reading because the trauma, the fear of reading was gone. They got caught up in acting. We took them to the theater. The head of the education department, who was our immediate supervisor, he didn't buy all the Sullivan reading kits. So now the business was saying, we're not ordering the reading kits. So they used it as an excuse. They cut his budget. We were spending much less money than anybody else because they were paperbacks. And the kids were reading. And our kids we were at the top of passing the GED because they enjoyed reading. And then we summarily got fired. So this woman who got me that job knew somebody who was teaching at a junior college in Newark. So I said, oh, really? I never taught college. She said, no, but this is a very exciting school. It's coming out of the rebellions of Newark. And they created this college, Essex County College. And, you know, they're doing all this exciting programs and la, la, la. Okay, well, what can I do? I don't have a job. So I went and I interviewed. And and I was talking to the person who was interviewing me. She was head of counseling, just like I'm talking to you. And I got hired. And at Essex, I worked for over 10 years. But it was, in many ways, it was like an HBCU, because it was, you know, Newark is predominantly a Black city. I had never taught these classes before. I mean, I knew a lot of African literature just because, not just because I'm an African, but I mean, because I studied them read them when I was young. But I didn't know very much about the Caribbean. I don't think I had not been to the Caribbean. So I got a teacher's grant, travel grant, and I went to about 14, 15 Caribbean islands during the summer break, and I took Daoud with me. And to see what the literature talks about, like to see and to smell and to touch tamarind, you know, or see a hibiscus blooming, or the flamboyant, you know, which is in so much of the poetry, to see what it looks like when the sun is shining on it, how it does look, it's flamboyant and it's brazen and it's, you know, the colors. There's a word in Spanish that colorando, you know, like that. Or this notion that you're surrounded by water and how dependent you are on the sound of the water and the wind from the water, because it can indicate turbulence, calm. Yeah, there's a listening that happens when you're surrounded by water. And so when I came back, I felt like I was somewhat prepared to teach. So I taught Kamal Brathwaite. I taught many of the New Beacon writers. And later, when I was very active with African Literature Association, I met a lot of the Caribbean writers. After a while, when you see like one person leading you to another person, and then that person opening door over there, and someone asked, like I never really looked for a job. Someone always led me almost hand by the hand to one job, from one job to the next job to the next job. I never really like looked in a newspaper and searched like that. That's just how human beings interacted in my life. I went from a writer to a writer's workshop to a writer's workshop to a this, always. And it was done, quote, for me by, quote, strangers. In my immediate family social circles, it was kind of the opposite. And so for a while, when I started thinking about that, I almost felt like not only were they not supportive, but they also, in a way, by not being supportive, I felt they were condoning. They were condemning, or condemning my desires, my efforts, etc. And I didn't know why. Um, and and but I just kept on doing whatever. I mean, because if you're alive, you have to keep living, right? Um, I don't know if I consciously tried to create environments that would be helpful to others. I just know that sometimes if somebody was talking about something and I would think about someone else who might be able to help them, it wasn't a payback for what had happened to me. It's just, I know somebody, da 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 da. And then you pass them on to that person. So I never really consciously thought about it. I was very interested in the early 1920s, that whole almost a phenomena of literary artistic movement that we talk about here as the Harlem Renaissance. You have somebody like Langston Hughes who's making declarations very much like what we did with Umbra. We perceive ourselves, we declare ourselves to be artists, to be writers, to be thinkers. We declare ourselves to be independent artists and thinkers. We declare ourselves to be independent of whatever, whomever says we are. We decide our work. We decide our value. We develop our potential. We write our work independent of you. We appreciate it. It's fine if you like it, but it's also fine if you don't like it. And we declare ourselves Black creators, Black writers. And during that time, Sidney Poitier and his first wife lived in Roslyn, Long Island, and they used to have gatherings where people from South Africa would talk. Those were, I guess maybe that was what I thought. I didn't have a salon that freaking mind, but I thought that's what would do. I read everything I could read on the Harlem Renaissance and how they would have soirees. And they would showcase musicians, classical musicians, European classical musicians, African American musicians, music, poetry, theater. A lot of that was done in people's homes. And it led to something so wonderful. So when I would meet someone, I would really, I started to start thinking about who this person could benefit from. It wasn't necessarily because I had not had the support that I wanted. I don't even know if I really understood that I wanted that, so I mean, you come into a knowledge, into an understanding in ways that are time related, time sensitive, and you don't always know what you don't know. I just want to be able to do what I'm doing. I just want to be able to write my little squiggles. I want to be able to sit and read the newspaper. I just want to be able to sit and stare out the bloody window and leave me alone. I just want to one day just get one of the books from my Oxford Dictionary and just sit and just go down the thing and see how words and meanings develop and where to take this word. I just want to hear Miles play in your own sweet way. Or the first record that I ever heard of him was him and Bill Evans. It never entered my mind. You have to listen to it, but just sit down and just let it just enter you. It's the most beautiful thing. When I first heard it, I cried. It was, I know that we used that word before, but it was transformational. And it confirmed whatever it was that my uncle was passing on to me when he first turned me on to jazz. That was 20 years from that time. And I know I did not make that connection at that time, but it allowed me to hear and to let that music enter my heart and my head and my soul. If you create community, if you open yourself up for community, the professional associations that I joined, they became community. African Literature Association had a lot of South African writers in it, although they were some of the founders of that organization. So I became friends, and I was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I knew all the people in the who were here. We were like we broke bread together. So I have a second home in South Africa. I'm very, very close to them. I go back and forth every 4 or 5 years. When I go, there's cars waiting for me. I have families in the Caribbean because I was a part of the Caribbean Studies Association. I'm going in May or June because one of those family members is bringing me there because they no longer come up. Maybe I have done a lot of things, but so much has been poured into me from so many different places by so many different people. So if I'm being honored, I want to honor them because I didn't just get this way by myself. I mean, I take responsibility for all the mistakes, and believe me, I've made a lot of mistakes and wrong things. But the good things that I have done really have their foundation in the good things that were done to me and for me. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all those people who we just don't have time to mention by name. But I love them dearly. And, I hope wherever they are, dead or alive, they are alive in me. That they won't be embarrassed to know me.